these moments are, yes, moments from my childhood, but all of our childhoods are different, and they're also the same. Good literature is particular, and it is also universal. And people will remember similar moments in their own experience, and hopefully be grateful that it's been captured in language, that they may not be able to do that, but now someone has done it for them. So that's why I like to think of the book as a kind of series of photographs and gifts to the reader, who also, treasure trying to find those moments and have language for them.
Welcome to the Habit Podcast, conversations with writers about writing. I'm Jonathan Rogers, your host. Angela Alaimo O'Donnell is a poet, professor, and scholar whose work sits at the crossroads of faith, memory, and the literary imagination. She teaches literature and creative writing at Fordham University and serves as Associate Director of the Curran Center for American Catholic Studies. I first came across Dr. O'Donnell's poetry by way of Andalusian Hours, her collection of sonnets in which she channels the voice of Flannery O'Connor. Her latest collection is The View from Childhood. As she has said, we all have a place we come from that has helped shape us into who we are. We all have memories that stay with us, bring us joy and haunt us, and we all face the daily decision of what to do with those memories, to preserve them or to let them fade. My vocation as a poet compels me to turn them into story and song. These poems tell my stories, and I also hope they in some way tell the readers. In this episode, Dr. O'Donnell and I talk about origin stories, Flannery O'Connor, and the idea that any writer who has survived childhood has enough material to last a lifetime. Angela Alaimo O'Donnell, I'm so happy to have you on the Habit Podcast.
Thank you, Jonathan. I'm so delighted to be here. I appreciate the invitation.
I have known my introduction to you and your work was through your work on Flannery O'Connor. But you also have a new collection of poetry out called The View from Childhood. So I want to talk about both. I always want to talk about Flannery O'Connor, but I want to talk about your new collection as well. So I think maybe since this is a collection of poems about childhood, mostly your childhood, toward the end there, a little bit about your children and grandchildren's childhood. Maybe a good place to start is that very well-known quotation from Flannery O'Connor: anybody who has survived his childhood has enough information about life to last him the rest of his days. I feel like your collection, The View from Childhood, demonstrates the truth of that observation. Mm-hmm. So something you say, I always find when I interview poets, I tend to spend more time talking about their introduction and epilogue than the actual poetry, because it's just easier to sometimes talk about. But I love what you said. As children, we experience the world with an intensity that is unmatched by any other period of our lives. The people we know, the events that occur, and the places we live in and visit leave an indelible impression on us. I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. There is, as we know, the child's brain grows at an enormous pace, so much faster than, we slow down after about the age of 4, right? And during that time, there are just so many impressions that we are exposed to, and some of them we remember, some of them just get lost in the stream of time. But I'm convinced that they're all in there in some kind of way, and they can be, I hate to use the word triggered because that suggests something negative. It doesn't have to be negative, but right. They can be brought back to us very suddenly. The famous moment in Proust, when he takes a bite of the Madeleine and he suddenly remembers his childhood. Yeah. I had a similar experience when I walked into a bakery, and I teach in the Bronx, and Little Italy, Bronx's Little Italy is right near my doorstep. I walked into one of those bakeries one day, and I suddenly smelled the Regina cookies that the bakery specializes in. It's like suddenly I was transported to my Sicilian grandmother's kitchen where she used to bake those cookies, and it was just so real and so vivid to me. So there really is this sense that we have this inexhaustible wellspring of sense impressions, of memories, of pictures in our heads that we can get access to, and poetry gives us access to those in very powerful ways.
Yeah, you quote Robert Frost in that probably on the same page of that same epilogue, when he says, the delight of writing poetry lies in the surprise of remembering something I didn't know I knew.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's so much that we don't have direct access to in our minds that we can get oblique access to. But you can sit forever. I mean, you might have sat forever trying to remember the Regina cookies. That might be a bad example because you probably could remember those. But there are things that come up, especially when I'm writing, that I would have never gotten to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Directly.
Yeah, there's something about the process of writing. Actually, and I tell my students this when they're starting to write poetry, I prefer to write with a pen and a piece of paper. There's something about the physical act and having those objects in your hand. I'm a Catholic, so I inevitably have a sacramental imagination. I think of them as sacramentals. You know, you've got your favorite pen, you've got your favorite chair, you've got the light coming in, the time of day, and you sit and you engage in your ritual of writing, and you never know what's going to come out of that pen. You just have no idea what's going to happen, which is part of the thrill of it, part of the excitement. Like, what am I going to discover today? It also can be terrifying. There are times, as Czeslaw Milosz says, sometimes when you write a poem, it's as if a tiger had sprung out of you and he stands in the light lashing his tail. Like, did that come out of me? Do I remember? Do I want to remember that? Do I want other people to read this? So there really is this sense of uncovering all sorts of things that we don't really know that we're going to uncover. As Frost says, remembering something I forgot that I knew. But there is something about the action of writing rather than speaking, rather than just trying to think. I'm a very concrete person. I have to be actually in the physical act of writing to be able to get access to those memories.
Yeah. Well, we've spoken of childhood as in the abstract, but tell us about your childhood.
Yeah, I mean, it was I suppose typical childhood for people of my generation. I was born in 1960, and so I was part of an Italian-American family living in a kind of Italian-American enclave. A bunch of kids in the family. There were 5 of us, not as many as there were for our Irish neighbors, but it was a good-sized family. And I was the 4th of 5, which I think was an interesting and an important position in the family to be in, because I was... There was the first 3 were born within a few years, and then there was this big gap, and then there was me, and they weren't so happy about it. And then there was my little brother 3 years later because they had more girls than they wanted, and they thought, let's have another boy. So we became complete at 5. But because there was that gap, and because I was a pretty inauspicious part of the family, like nobody cares about the 4th child of 5. Trust me, there are very few baby pictures of me. But it put me in the interesting position of sort of being a watcher rather than a participant in the family. And this was particularly important because my dad, unfortunately, died unexpectedly when I was 8. He had been sick all of his life in various ways, but he suddenly died, leaving my mother with 5 children, my pretty young mother with 5 children. He had died at 42. She was in her 30s. And it's interesting that's right around the time I was 8. It's right around the time I started writing. I had always, loved poetry and kind of played with words when I was like 5 and 6, but like I really, in a concentrated way, I didn't write about loss and tragedy or anything, but I think I just went to language to try to say the things that weren't being said, that were unsayable in many ways. So yeah, that was sort of a watershed experience for our family, and I watched my older brothers and sisters, and my mother too, in this awful grieving process. And I was kind of detached from it all. My dad had been ill. He had been in the hospital. He was also a typical Italian-American dad in that he was not chummy with his children. I have a novel that's in process for many years, the first line of which is, my mother and father didn't I'm sorry, I forgot the first line. My parents should never have had children, so they had 5. That neither of them were good at it. So they were good at making children, but they were not very good at raising them. So so my dad's loss for me was sort of like, okay, well, this is interesting. This is a new, and it definitely catapulted our family into a new way of being, because I went to work when I was 13 years old. I've never been out of work since then. I've had 2 jobs in my life. I was a waitress and a college professor, and both I loved both of those jobs. Learned a lot about people in both of those jobs. So it was a childhood which I guess in some ways was typical of that time, but we did have this tragic event that happened to us that made us different from all of the other people in our neighborhood, in our little Italian American enclave. My mom was a single mom, and she was an interesting woman. She had her own issues that she had to deal with, and that, again, I felt like I was watching my family fall apart in many ways. And so a lot of what I have done in my poems over the years, and not really consciously, I think every poet, when they first start out, you write about what you know. You write about your own life, right? Even though Flannery O'Connor wrote, she said, I could never write about myself, so I write about other people. But there's a lot of Flannery people and a lot of her neighbors, her mother. So I just kind of went at it directly, writing poems in a way to kind of I feel as though I became the archivist, the historian of what had happened to our family.
You say that your hardscrabble, barely literate, post-immigrant world proved to be fertile ground for poetry. Tell me about that. The barely, what caught my eye was barely literate. How does a barely literate world give rise to poetry?
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting question and a very interesting process that happens because we had no books in our house. We were not bookish people at all. My mother never graduated from high school, neither did my father. They were not school people. And there was never a plan. In a lot of immigrant families, the plan is the child is going to go to college so that that was not in our family. People became hairdressers and they became factory workers and worked in restaurants. That was really the trajectory that was expected for you. But I went to school and fell in love with school because I knew something was going on there that was really important. And I was a very bright kid, and my teachers recognized that. And I went to very poor public schools, not good public schools at all. But my teachers immediately saw, okay, this is a smart girl. And we had a library. I used to go to the library and check out the thickest books I could find because I thought that there's something in there that I needed. And I showed them my teachers my poems, and they encouraged me in this. Not something my mother even knew about or would have cared about. So school became a lifeline for me, and continued to be. So I'm the only person in my family that went to college. They did take some courses, but actually finished college and got degrees, etc. Have been just a lifelong school person. And it was a little puzzling, I think, when I was younger to my siblings, like, why do you want to do this? There are certainly jobs where you could make a lot more money, and it's like, that's very true. But it's also like I can't imagine a job that would give me more joy than being able to teach the books that I love, that I grew up loving and learned so much from, and now I get to pass them on to the next generation.
Yeah. As I was reflecting on this idea of a not bookish environment giving rise to a poet or a writer, it occurred to me it's not actually that rare. I mean, it's when you hear about writers, they're not all saying, some of them say I came from a very bookish family, but it doesn't seem to me that it's more likely that bookishness gives rise to writers than not bookishness. It's I think the most important thing you said was you were an observer, that you paid attention to the world around you. Yeah,
and the world is an interesting place. Everybody's family is interesting. Everybody's household is interesting. It's just that we're all interesting in different ways. And if you have that kind of, I think part of this is a disposition that you have. If you're a watcher and you like to watch and you like to observe, as Flannery said from a very early age, I like to stare. You have to stare if you're going to be a writer. And then there's also this second urge that you have. You're watching, but then I need to record this in some way. I need to figure out exactly what it is that this means. And when I was a kid, I wrote poems. I really wanted to be an opera singer. My mother, we had a stereo in our house, and we listened to music all day long. And because there was one stereo, and there were when my dad was alive, 7 people. It was a very broad range of things we would listen to, so everything from Frank Sinatra and, the Italian-American crooners to opera to the Woodstock and Motown, So I had this great vocabulary that I had, absorbed from all of this music we were listening to, and I just wanted to be a singer. But unfortunately, singing lessons weren't in the cards for me, 4th of 5 kids in a working class family. And I was I had a pretty good voice, but certainly not something that was going to be able to let me make my living this way. But then I realized that being a poet was kind of like being a singer, because you can sing with language, and all I needed was a pen and a piece of paper. And so I figured that part out. But I also would draw a lot. I also sang on my guitar. I played music by myself. So I was always like trying to find some artistic way to express what it was that I was seeing.
Yeah. Well, you have that poem about Flannery O'Connor where she says, you're reflecting on her saying she has a 10 ear, and yet her music is the voices of the people around her that she can capture.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that's always been so funny to me. She, when you look at Flannery's books, she didn't read a lot of poetry. She read mostly prose. And as she says, one of my favorite sayings that she says, she sends a poem about peacocks to her friend Sally Fitzgerald. And she says, it's not very good. And she says, besides, I think poetry is a filthy habit for fiction writers to get into. So I love to think about that funny. As I sit there in the morning practicing my filthy habit, So.
Yeah. Well, she did write the poem about when she sold the rights to the story. The Life You Said May Be Your Own. She got a check for it and bought a refrigerator. And she said, "Hidey ho and hip hooray, I'm in this thing for pay."
Yep. And she did write a lot of poems when she was a kid, like me. In fact, when I look at Flannery's juvenilia, there's this lovely, when I was doing work in the archives a few years ago, I came across this birthday card at Emory that she had written for her father. And it's like, and the title is How to Live to 80 and Still Get to Heaven. And she gives him all this advice about avoiding liquor. Well, liquor is a bad thing, but it's all in verse. And she also has these charming drawings that go with it. And that's exactly the kind of thing that I would have done when I was her age. So this is another kind of source of affinity that I feel as though I have with her, because we were both weirdos in a way, and we also both knew we were weirdos. I don't know if that kind of frees you to not worry about what people think. You just kind of do what you do. But I was always definitely, she was a weirdo because she was an only child, because she didn't get along with other kids. She didn't like kids. She preferred adults. Her dad, of course, loved her and smothered her with affection and admiration. Regina, not so much, I had similar, I didn't have the affectionate dad, but I did have a mom who looked at me and where did you come from? What's wrong with you? I wasn't conventionally pretty. I wasn't the kind of, I wasn't like my sisters. They were all like a little triumvirate, my mom and 2 sisters. Yeah. And I was like the oddball. So it was kind of freeing in a way because I didn't try to conform. I knew there was no way I could do it, I'll just go off and write stuff in the corner.
Would you be willing to read one of your poems?
Absolutely.
The one I would love to hear you read is The Still Pilgrim Recollects Her Childhood. Do you have that readily available?
I do. I have the book right here. Just have to, it's probably pretty early in the book because, these are kind of...
Page 14.
Page 14, yes. Actually, I have page 5, so in this clock.
Okay. Oh, gotcha. I gotcha.
So all of these poems in Still Pilgrim is a character that I invented. She's sort of me, like me in some ways, but she's also not me. So they're not strictly autobiographical poems.
Gotcha.
But the idea of the book is that we all make the pilgrimage through life. And is it possible to be still moving on through life, even though sometimes you feel like you're not going anywhere? This concept of the contradiction between being still and also being on pilgrimage. Another interesting and important thing about the poems is they're all sonnets. And I believe that the sonnet is a version of the Stations of the Cross. because they have 14 lines, and each line takes you further along a journey and takes you to a place that is different from where you started. So this is, of course, something I made up entirely. It's probably, the sonnet was invented by Giacomo Lentini, a Sicilian, by the way. Petrarch gets the credit, but it was Lentini who really created it. And, the Stations of the Cross have changed over the years in terms of the numbers of stations. So this is an entirely fantasy of mine that these two things are created, but nonetheless, that's the fantasy I'm living by. This is a sonnet like all of the other poems in the book. The still pilgrim recollects her childhood. Inside my mind there sleeps another mind, the child mind that used to dream disaster, collected every darkness she could find, trembled before death and what comes after. She was a brooder, fed her hungry eye, noted small agonies that made her sadder. Ragged stockings, the boy whose mother died in kindergarten, all he did was cry. She knew herself lonely, didn't belong with the happy kids, the thoughtless throng who skated across the thin ice of life, their blades glinting bright, keen as a knife, scoring the sky of the world below, unmindful of the undertow.
Well, I love that poem so much. I just thought it was autobiographical. I thought you had a little kindergarten friend whose mother died. But
I did. I actually did.
Oh, you did. Okay.
And he shows up actually in the new book as well, because it's one of my core memories of kindergarten.
Yeah.
Because one of the terrible things that happened after my father died, my worst fear was that my mother would die, and then we would be completely alone. And that had happened to my friend Robert Lampman when we were in kindergarten when I was only 5, and it's almost as though that was a precursor to the tragedy that was going to happen to me, and a fear that it might happen. So, it's that part is definitely all of this poem is autobiographical. Really, this one.
Okay. Well, I was so struck by that idea of I didn't belong with the happy kids who skated along the surface, across the thin ice of life. And but there's this undertow under the surface that that the poet here is attentive to, and made me think about a poem that you wrote in Flannery O'Connor's voice. Now I'm not sure remember the name. It was in your Andalusian Hours poem collection, but the idea that, and you aren't quoting her here, you were interpolating that her mother Regina saw life as a lazy river, sort of flowing between the banks, but she herself, Flannery, saw the life under the surface, the fish who might get caught, who had their own little dramas going on underneath. And I was just so aware of this idea that the writer's job, that the poet's job in your case, is to pay attention to the same life that everybody's living, but that not everybody is as attentive to what's going on.
Yeah, I thank you. I love that you made the connection between those two poems, because I do think that there is this sense, and Flannery, when her watershed experience is the death of her father when she was 15.
Right.
And she says, it's our whole lives have changed. We had plans, God had other plans, and it's like a bullet in the side. So she's really traumatized by the experience, and that her I feel like my childhood was over at 8. Her childhood was basically over at 15. So I really wasn't even thinking about that when I was writing this poem about O'Connor. But we do have a similar tragic view in some ways. I always felt like the other kids, they all had dads. They weren't poor. They didn't have to listen to their mom come home at night from waitressing and cry at the kitchen table because she didn't have enough money to be able to buy groceries. Like, I just felt like they were so lucky because they didn't know any of those things, and they were all having a great time skating around. Well, I was like, this ice is really thin, and it's going to give way. Believe me, it's going to give way, at some point. And that's pretty young to have that perception,
Well, I think one thing I appreciate both about what you do in your poems and what O'Connor did was this awareness that somebody needs to look beneath the surface, and yet you're very respectful of the people in the family, the people in your world who are skating, and I love that O'Connor she so loved her mother, who was so different from her, and sure, her mother just saw the lazy river, but the poets need the people who see the lazy river too, right? I mean, the poets need the person who is. O'Connor depended on her mother more than Regina depended on Flannery.
Absolutely.
And so there's, again, you speak of this barely literate world that gave rise to a poet, not in terms of I escaped from these people or that. I mean, think about. I was just listening the other day to The Enduring Chill, where the main character talks about how his mother never understood him, and that he whatever intellectual freedom he had was in spite of her, not because of what he was so unaware of how much he owed to his mother. And I think writers somehow need to come to terms with the fact that, yes, writers slow down and pay more attention, but we're still part of a community of people whose job isn't necessarily to pay quite as much attention, and that's okay too. I don't even know what I thought you might have some remarks about that. I don't know how to finish that thought, but I thought maybe you could help.
Absolutely. Couple of things. First of all, that there, but for the grace of God go I. I immediately thought of J.D. Vance's book Hillbilly Elegy, which of course he published well before he became Vice President of the United States. And I remember when I read that book, I thought, I don't know, like to treat your family like this. I don't know. They're simple people. Yeah, you got to go off and go to Yale, and now you're a big important person. But like, one of the things that, and of course, that's not a book of poetry or a book of fiction. That is a memoir. And I think that something different happens there, because one of the things that happens to you, happens to O'Connor when she writes fiction, happens to a poet when he or she is writing poetry, is you engage in this process of, sympathetic imagination. You see the world through your eyes, but you're also seeing the world through their eyes. And you arrive at a place, at least it's been in my experience, at a place of peace, at a place of forgiveness of these very flawed people that you're writing about. Not everybody in my family is quite so forgiving of my difficult parents. And I think that, what makes me different about that, I think it is because of this process, this years long process of just thinking about them in a different way, trying to see them as human beings, and to understand them, and that leads to love, that inevitably leads to love. So yeah, I think it's, and Flannery felt the same thing. She deeply loved her mother, even though she makes fun of her constantly, and creates these terrible characters who are obviously disguised versions of Regina. Mrs. Turpin. All of these bad mothers, and yet even the worst of those mothers has some redeeming quality, has some characteristic. That they are redeemable. Everybody is redeemable. Even serial killers are redeemable. So certainly your mother is. Again, I think that's because of what Flannery does through the writing of fiction, the fictionalization of her mother and herself in characters like Holga, allows her to forgive herself too. Or one of my favorite stories is Temple of the Holy Ghost. That little girl is Flannery, and she is such a brat face. And yet Flannery sees in her the seeds of holiness, that the child is able to begin to lay claim to at the end of the story, as much as a brat as she might be. So again, I think it's part of this mysterious process of imaginative literature, creating imaginative literature. I'm sure the same thing happens for people who are painters, people who write music, people who are sculptors. Those are arts I can't practice, sadly, but it certainly happens through imaginative writing. Okay, I want to talk about attention
a tension that I see in your writing, your poems. On the one hand, book learning on the one hand, and you've already talked about how important books were to you as a child, and that you needed those books to become a writer. And yet, there's such a thing as being too bookish to be a poet.
Mm-hmm.
Because you have to see with your own eyes rather than, there's a limit to how much your reading can see for you. And so on the one hand, you've got the poem about the Temple of the Library, in which you talk about I long to learn the hidden art of language, how to know by heart the best lines ever thought and said, to get inside my child-sized head the words I'd need to tell the truth. Mm-hmm. And then on the other hand, in Andalusian Hours, one of the poems, you say, a storyteller must use her own words and wit. The truth always lies under your nose, and you have to see it. Mm-hmm. Too much learning is a dangerous thing. Mm-hmm. I read what I want. I know what I can. I can only be the writer I am. Mm-hmm. So to what extent do you sort of wrestle around with this tension between book learning on the one hand and experience or observation on the other?
Yeah, that's a great question. Flannery, in many ways, she was not that much of a reader as a child. She liked to read the stories of Edgar Allan Poe. They made her laugh. And she knew he was a weirdo, so she had this affinity with him. But it really wasn't until she got to graduate school that she kind of really put herself to school. And she starts reading Faulkner. She starts reading Henry James. Mm-hmm. She's reading Hemingway. Like, she's trying to catch up, right, on everything that she hasn't read before. And she also was an autodidact when it came to theology. She would read these books by Guardini. She would school herself to try to figure out like what's going on with my faith as a Catholic, what's going on philosophically in the world, and of course she did a great job of being able to keep the books out of her world, because these are not bookish people that she's writing about. And I think I have a similar sort of experience. First of all, I don't think of myself as a terribly learned person when it comes to ologies, philosophies, theologies. Those things are very interesting to me. Physics, math, sciences, they're very interesting to me. And I like to read broadly. I read indiscriminately. But most of what I've been reading all my life has been imaginative literature. And I think a writer can never read too much of that, because these are worlds that people, create for you and that you enter into and that you become changed by them, by inhabiting them. And I think similarly, you can never really watch enough movies. If you're watching really good television, you can't watch it, because all of these people who create good worlds for us, interesting worlds for us, should help to shape our own imaginations. So I think I've been protected from too much book learning by my choice of my discipline. It might be a little harder to be a poet if you are, a student of philosophy. If you spend a lot of time reading theology, or history, another problem because of the kind of abstraction and the broad approach that you have to do. A poet does exactly the opposite. They go, and so does a fiction writer, they go in, the details are your entryway into the world. I don't know if you've seen the film by Ethan Hawke, Wildcat, that's about Flannery. One of the things I love about that film is he demonstrates how Flannery will be just doing an ordinary thing. She's on the train, or she's waiting at the Grand Central Station for her train, and she sees a man with one arm. He's got his sleeve flap, up against his chest. And then she begins to think about the story, The Life You Saved May Be Your Own. All of Flannery's stories grow out of a real experience, a person that she's seen, or an article that she's read in the paper or something. And that's the same thing with poetry. Poems grow out of actual, details that you suddenly remember. And then those details help you to call up other details and recreate that world. And that's the opposite of people who, are rationalists, abstractors. They want to tell truth with a capital T. Poetry and fiction tells truth with a small t. And as a result, it's interesting. We don't always communicate well. Like I have a lot of colleagues who are, do belong to those fields, and I don't think they really understand, what I do, or really love, understand or really love literature, because it's just such a different way of knowing. And it's something that you have to have patience for. You have to cultivate your ability to be able to imaginatively enter into it. And again, that comes from a lot of reading,
Yeah. Okay. But how does that relate to the idea of what was the line from your poem? The truth always lies under your nose, and you have to see it. And too much learning is a dangerous thing because it keeps us. I took it to mean too much learning is dangerous because it keeps us from seeing with our own eyes.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Yeah.
And I guess you mean there's certain kind of reading that does, but imaginative literature doesn't cause us that.
Yeah,
doesn't have that same.
Yeah, I think there's a tendency. Well, let's think about the social sciences for a moment, which actually was what Flannery was. That's what she majored in high school.
I just
college.
Cannot make any sense out of that.
Can't make any sense out of it. Where the social sciences are always trying to categorize people. Oh, that person is that kind of person, and that person is that kind of person. I'm like, that does. Serious. I mean, sometimes that can be helpful, I suppose, but it prevents you from being able to see people as individuals. As Flannery says, what I write about, the mystery of the human personality. People are strange. They're deeply strange. And sometimes these categories that, social science likes to put people into denies that mystery, denies that strangeness, and erases our ability. Like once somebody could say, "Oh, you're an obsessive compulsive. I've got you. You're in a box. I don't need to look at you anymore," as opposed to like just get rid of that label and look at the person. And most of Flannery's characters are afflicted in some kind of way, whether it's a physical affliction, a spiritual one, an intellectual one. And that's because we all are, right? And we need to be able to look at each other as individual human beings and not allow this. And it's our culture not allow this culture that wants to, even our identity politics, right? People want it immediately. Oh, you're a Democrat, you're bad. Oh, you're a Republican, you're bad. Oh, you're a woman writer, or you're an African American writer, or you're a Jewish writer. Oh, I think I understand what you do. And it's like, no, you really. If you're a good writer, you're writing for everybody,
Yeah. Well, I know we need to wrap up soon, but I want to talk about the idea, again, that I think recurs in your poems of poetry as a way of preserving the things that are always transient, because all things are transient. And yet, when we write, I guess when we do any art form, we're trying to somehow fix something that won't be, that cannot help but go away. And in your one of your poems that you wrote for a granddaughter who likes to write poems, you said, "Ours is an odd calling, this need to write, to make things real, to make things feel as if they'll last. The pure delight of words nearly enough to heal the dark knowledge. The pure delight of words nearly enough to heal the dark knowledge that all things pass."
Yeah.
Nearly enough, not quite enough to heal that dark knowledge.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's something, of course, that we all have. I mean, I like everyone else in the world, I have a cell phone that has probably 15,000 photographs on it, because we're constantly taking pictures of things because we want to make the experience last, the joyful experience that we're having with our friends, or the vacation that we're on, or whatever it might be. So you don't even need to be an artist to have this desire, right? It's deep within all of us to try to make it last in some way. The cover of my new book, actually, I'm thrilled that my publisher did this. I gave them a vintage photograph of myself and my siblings. And the four siblings are behind. I'm in a little baby pool in the backyard. It's sort of pathetic. So I'm 3. I'm sitting there in my little baby pool with my little bathing suit on, and my older siblings are behind me, and they're all hovered around my baby brother, like, my 3-month-old baby brother who everyone worships, right? And they're this little smiling group back there. And then there's me, who's just kind of looking at the camera, right? And I love the fact that they put that photograph on the page, on the cover, so that it looks like there are a lot of other photographs underneath. And so I think of the book then, this is not the book, but if this were the book is a series of photographs. Each poem is a kind of photograph, kind of still moment from that endless, relentless stream of life that we're caught in the middle of, where I've been able to catch one moment and put it into language, put it into words, and keep it for myself, but then for any reader who wants to come along and read it. And these moments are, yes, moments from my childhood, but all of our childhoods are different, and they're also the same. Good literature is particular, and it is also universal. And people will remember similar moments in their own experience, and hopefully be grateful that it's been captured in language, that they may not be able to do that, but now someone has done it for them. That's why I like to think of the book as a kind of series of photographs and gifts to the reader, who also, treasure trying to find those moments and have language for them.
There's that long tradition of the poet achieves immortality through the poetry, which I have mixed feelings about. But the idea that you're giving life to other things and other people that lives beyond their life, I have less mixed feelings about that. And that it's not an act of egotism, right? To frame it as I'm going to achieve immortality, like Ozymandias, through my work that's inevitably going to fall down in the sand anyway. But to say no, I'm giving life to somebody else.
Absolutely, and it's the difference between let's say statesmen who do, like Ozymandias and others, who do like to put their names on everything and think that in some way that's going to memorialize them forever, right? But as you say, it's going to fall down. As you say, when they pass on, which they will, those names are going to be removed, and other people's names are going to put that. And those, of course, are acts of egotism, right? They're the assertion of the self. They are a sort of a sad incomprehension of their mortality, right? But I think of art as just this very generous act. This is a gift that the artist gives. To the people, that the readers, in the case of poetry, but also to those people who they're writing about. I include in the introduction those marvelous lines from Shakespeare in the sonnet, his famous sonnet, where at the end he says, "So long as men can breathe and eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee." So long lives this poem, and so long lives the woman or the man, depending on your perspective, that he is memorializing in the poem. So it's not about him. In fact, Shakespeare is the most selfless of all writers. It's only in those sonnets, which are not the very many, that he uses an I himself. All of his plays are about other people, like Hamlet, Macbeth, Cleopatra, like all of these people that he has given life to. And we know almost nothing about him. Just tremendous act of generosity. Now, of course, he was making a living and he was getting paid for this. But nonetheless, he obviously was reaching after something much, much greater than that. I think that's how most good artists, genuine artists, think about what it is that they do.
Yeah. I so love your way of putting it. Through poetry, my lost beloveds are forever found. So many of the people you write about in these poems are not among the living anymore, and yet they live in these poems.
Yeah, I actually just had a very interesting experience with that. I was giving a reading at a church. It was a Lenten experience where people came to listen to a few poems. There was a cellist who played some music, some Bach. I read a few poems the cellist played. So I read a poem from the new book called, I'm sorry, it's a poem about my brother, and it suddenly has fled from my head. The Lost Child, it's called. Sorry about that. And it's, again, specifically about my younger brother who died. My youngest brother died a few years ago, which was, of course, very traumatic for all of us because we all thought of ourselves as being 5. We've always been 5, and then all of a sudden, especially the youngest, disappears. And it's like we're still trying to configure who we are. But there's also this sense that he's still with us. We always talk about him in the present tense, So I read this poem, which is, very specific memories of him getting lost when he was a child. Because we were always losing him, and then we'd find him, and then we'd lose him again, and then we'd find him. You're youngest of 5. Nobody knows where you are,
Yeah, right.
So I did read this poem, and afterwards, one of the people who was in the audience came up to me, and she said, "Thank you so much for reading that poem." She said, "It brought tears to my eyes. There's someone in my family just like that. And the same thing has happened, and I appreciate you bringing them alive for me again." And that's just the best response you can ever ask for as a writer. It's again, it's not about me, and it's not even really. It's about my brother, yes, but it's also about the reader and the reader's own lost beloveds that can be brought back in some way.
Yeah, I love it. Well, Angela, let's end with my typical last question, and that is, who are the writers who make you want to write? You can't say Flannery O'Connor. We already know that one.
Yeah, well, ask me that on any day, and I will tell you something different, because I'm blessed to be able to teach so many writers. And I fall in love with them all over again when I teach them and share them with my students. I have a poem called Conjure, in which the epigraph is, art is our way of breaking bread with the dead. And so when I feel whenever I'm writing, all of the dead writers and the living ones are in the room with me. I actually write on my side porch where I've got this great library of wonderful poets that are there. And so their books are physically near me, but also I know that their voices are in my head. I know that they are part of the way that I see the world. So recently I'm reading Thomas Merton and Czesław Miłosz with my students, and so they're egging me on. I actually just published 5 poems in the Merton seasonal. These are 5 poems in conversation with Thomas Merton. When I read Shakespeare, it's Shakespeare who's doing it. When I'm reading Emily Dickinson, it's Emily Dickinson that is doing it. So I really feel as though I've got this amazing a team, a huge team of writers that are part of the team that I'm on, that are cheering me on, that are encouraging me, that are giving me inspiration all the time. And Frost is always in my Seamus Heaney is always in my head. So these.
You got your little cloud of witnesses.
Exactly, it is. It's a cloud of witnesses. They're part of my communion of saints, that I walk with every day, and we all walk with. They're all walking with us. So, I'm sorry I'm so vague about that, because it's very hard for me to just say, oh, it's this person that does it, because it's really a lot of people.
Yeah. Well, Angela Alaimo O'Donnell, thank you so much for being here. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you, Jonathan. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
The Habit Podcast is brought to you by The Rabbit Room, where art nourishes community and community nourishes art. You can support their work, including this podcast, by becoming a member. Visit rabbitroom.com/membership. Special thanks as well to Taylor Leonard for letting us use her song Diamonds as the theme music for the Habit Podcast. You can learn more about Taylor and follow her work at taylorleonard.com. The Habit membership is a library of resources for writers by me, Jonathan Rogers. More importantly, The Habit is a hub of community where like-minded writers gather to discuss their work and give each other a little more courage. Find out more at thehabit.co.